Good morning, hello year 2. We are starting a new topic in RE today. We are looking at something called the Old Testament, which you may have heard of or you may not have heard of. So it's a good thing that the first lesson that we are going to do today is looking at the question of what is the Old Testament? Okay, what is the Old Testament then? So the Old Testament is the first half of the Bible. It's half the Bible that is much older than the second half, and it's shared with Jewish people. So people who are of the Jewish faith also have the Old Testament, although they call it, we can call it the Hebrew Scriptures or the Jewish Scriptures. They share that. So this is a Bible here. It's a big book. It'll take you a long time to read all of that. The first half, approximately. So everything on this side here is the Old Testament, and everything on this side here is the New Testament. And this was written in one period of history, and we're going to look at that in a moment. And this was written several hundred years later in a different part. And the New Testament tells the story of Jesus, and that's really just Christians who use the New Testament. But the Old Testament tells the story of the Hebrew or the Israeli or the Jewish people. It's shared by Christians and Jews, and a lot of the stories also appear in the Islamic Quran as well. And you can see it's much longer than the New Testament. So it's longer, it's older, and it's shared with Jewish people. So let's find out a little bit about the Bible. The Bible, you probably know, is the Christian holy book. So Christians believe that this book was written by human beings, but that it was inspired by God. There's a picture of someone's idea of God on the front cover there. So it's the Christian holy book. There are two parts to the Bible, as we've already discussed. The Old Testament, which contains stories from 2,500 to 4,500 years ago. That's an incredibly long time ago. 2,500 years ago is before the Romans. Well, is it? No. Wait, let me get that right. It's about the time of the Romans sort of coming to power. It's 4,500 years ago, is well before the Romans. It's around about the time sort of the Egyptians. It's a really, really, really long time ago. The New Testament, however, is slightly more modern, but not much. It's only 2,000 years old, and that tells the story of Jesus Christ and the very first days of the Christian church. So here's a timeline for us. Up here above me, that is today, that's 2020, and all the way over there on the other side of the timeline is 2500 BC. And what we need to do before we go any further is make sure we understand BC and AD, because you might have seen these before, you might not, but you probably come across these if you study any more history at school, and we'll certainly be using these when we talk about RE. BC stands for before Christ. So Christians, and actually most sort of Western countries like America and the UK and France, we use the birth of Jesus Christ as our sort of day zero. So we use the year that Jesus was born. Whether or not it's the real year is one thing or another, but we use the year that Jesus was born as day zero, and then we count up, and that's AD, so Anno Domini. So 2020, we are 2020 years, not my microphone over there, we are 2020 years Anno Domini after Christ. And then we count backwards as well. So if we wanted to describe something that happened 100 years before Jesus was born, we would say we were 100 BC, 100 years before Christ. And the first stories found in the Bible, the first stories in the Old Testament, some of the stories that we're going to be looking at, they were first written down or first told 2,500 years BC. And just to clarify, that doesn't mean 2,500 years before now. It means we go back 2,020 years to Jesus, and then we go back another 2,500 years. So let me just do a bit of maths. So we go back 2,020 years, and then we go back 2,500 years. So I make that about 4,520 years ago, which is like, it's even difficult for me to think about how long ago that was. A really long time ago. And so we've looked at the history, but let's look at some of the geography as well. So this is the modern day Middle East. You might have heard of a lot of these countries. You've got Iraq, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, Egypt, Sudan, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Iraq. I think I said Iran. The stories that we're mostly going to look at, I'm going to turn the pointer on, they take place here in this area of the Middle East. So up here, this is Europe. You can see this is Italy. The UK is off up here in the top left-hand corner. And this is the country of Israel. There's also the state of Palestine, which is mixed in there as well. This is what's called the Sinai Peninsula that will become important. And this is Egypt. So a lot of the stories that we're going to learn about take place in sort of this area here. But they take place well before anyone had ever heard of any of these countries. They take place really a very, very long time ago. So all of the stories of the Old Testament are set in the Middle East. This is east of the UK and between, so you've got Europe over here and Asia over here. It's a very loud tractor, wasn't it? You've got Europe over here, Asia over here, and Africa down here. So today you can start filling out your booklet. You can fill in the 2 events from your timeline to help you understand BC and AD. And then what you'll see is we're basically going to be doing a lot of storytelling for the next few lessons. We're going to look at these different stories. And so each lesson you've got, that's upside down, each lesson you've got a storyboard to fill out, which is pretty straightforward. Uses the same images I'm going to use in the presentation and the lesson, and then you can just write your caption underneath. But also, if you are feeling extra clever at RE, there are also extension questions at the beginning. So each lesson from lesson 2 onwards has extension questions for you to answer. So if you want to be really clever and fill out the extension questions, you can do. Otherwise, you can just fill out the storyboard as we go along, and today you're just doing the timeline. Great. So lovely to speak to you as ever. I will see you next week. Have a lovely weekend. Yeah, have a great one. See you later. Bye bye, year 2.